Hello, my name is Andy O'Neill, and thanks for watching Weblytica TV. I'm joined today by my good friend, Loic Sebe. Loic is the owner of WiseFlow, and he builds business-saving automations with no-code tools, and he's been doing that for about 6 years. Loic is a registered Integromat partner. You can contact Loic and check out more about what he does at wiseflow.com. Loic, welcome.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the introduction. So just a little correction. It's wiseflow.co, co.
Oh, .co. I have .co in my notes, but yeah, I said .com. Force I have it. My bad.
No worries.
Well, thanks for being my very first guest of the very first show ever. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, this is my very first show ever too, so a lot of pressure.
We'll keep it easy.
All right.
So tell me about, before we get into our topic, tell me about business saving automations. I'm hoping you have a story about that, how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, like every customer is different, every business is different. So, one of my first business saving automation that, I came to Zapier. I was a Zapier user before to be an Integromat user, and I was working for a business that had a lot of automation need, a lot of manual tasks. I started to build like a lot of automation for that business. But like one of them that kind of like pop up in my mind is we used to have a Knack database for this business, and every single, so it was based on contractors to people's tutor to people's home. And so in a database, every single potential connection between a contractor and the client was one entry, one record. And so the way the system was working with Zapier is like the contractor the tutor could either like decline or accept the job, but as long as they were not kind of like they had not made a decision about accepting or declining, they're receiving one email every day with the job details until they took some kind of action. And the issue with this is when they was getting really busy, sometimes they were getting 10, 15, 20 emails a day. And instead of like just accepting or declining jobs, what they were doing, they were just unsubscribing. So that became like a big business issue. And Zapier didn't have the ability to really handle. So what we wanted to do was to send all the jobs in one email once a day. So like, even though if they were not taking action into accepting or declining, they would only get one email. And Zapier was not able to do this. So like one of the first big integration I built with Integromat was able to like just create a database, pull all the job details for each tutor and send them like a very nicely formatted email with like all those jobs. And that was really important for business, for the client, because suddenly, like no matter how busy the area was for each contractor, they were only getting one email, and from the same email, I could decline or request jobs. So it was like, from that day, I fell in love with Integromat, and I was like, this is opening so many new doors for automation, and that's just like one example that probably was helped a business like to retain like hundreds of contractors instead of by just reducing the churn rate and like making sure like making their life easier, making the business life easier. And also like in Zapier, it was costing a lot of automation. It was like a lot of operations for 1,000 contractors. Like sending them 10 emails a day, that's 10,000 operation every day. That's 300,000 operation in Zapier, which is probably over like 300,000. That would be like probably like $1,000 alone just for this automation.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So that was a big cost saving, and so it was saving time, was saving money, and also just making everybody's life easier.
That's cool. That's very cool. So we're going to talk about Integromat in a second, but you mentioned Knack. Quickly tell people watching what Knack is.
So Knack is like a no-code like app/database app. So what it does is like it allows people to build like simple relational databases, kind of like MySQL, but without coding anything. And and then being able to build pages on top of this. So imagine you could build your own custom CRM, and you build like one object called client, one object called lead, one object called deal, and you just create whatever fields you want. You connect them. You could say, okay, every client can have as many deals, can be connected to as many deals as they want, and then you create a page to, okay, like maybe for a client to self-onboard, so they can just type in their name, email, and then suddenly have an account on your app. And they could, I don't know, you could have them, like request a quote, for example, right there, and just add a new quote object. So what it does, it allows to create application without coding anything. It's perfect to build databases, custom CRMs, ERPs, so like kind of like core system where you can store all the data. So like one way to use it, for example, you could store all your operations data. For example, let's say if you go back to the tutoring business, you could have all your tutor information in there, all your client information, all the packages that you've sold. And, every package is going to one client and one tutor. And then from there, you could do all kind of integration. It has a great API, so you could kind of connect to any tool you want. For example, in a tutoring business, like what we've done, we've been processing people's credit cards from this app. So just, like in a click in the app, actually send data to Stripe. And then he sent data to Stripe. Stripe process the payment. And then he creates a sales receipt in Quickbooks, and then he look back to Knack and say, hey, this payment has been processed. This is a ID for the sales receipt in Quickbooks. So that's kind of an example. It's just like from an employee that can just, it's great to build like internal app for employees. So like to run a business, like I've been building Knack app, for example, for e-commerce to manage their orders. So I had a client, they had a Etsy store and a Shopify store. So it was a good way to centralize all their order in one place. And then manage, like the status of the order, like from received, produced, shipped, etc. And so a lot of time people arrive in Knack because they're using Google Sheets.
Right.
So that's kind of like when the Google Sheets or Excel namer is too much to take, that's when people start to send inquiry about or looking around and looking tools like Knack or Airtable. Right. And then when it's done properly, it's just like it is like really, it can change a business.
And really, it's you and I are both Knack and Integromat users, and so what I kind of describe it as, if you own a business and like you look around and like there's no software that fits exactly what you need to do, you can build it with Knack typically.
Yeah, typically.
And Integromat.
And for me, that's how I got to Knack. I was trying to. So you have a couple options, right? You have like trying to. Basically you have three options, I think. Is like the first option is like you try to find something off the shelf, like a tool that already exists, and try to make it fit your needs. And that's often, it can work enough at the beginning, but it tends to we always find some kind of limitation at some point that's, right. It's like, I wish this tool could do this. And then suddenly you enter the hacking phase where you're kind of like tweak the tool to try to do what you want to do. And it starts to be very complicated, sometimes dangerous, and is impossible to maintain. Or I've tried to hack CRMs into working like a little ERP before. And it got so complex, because we're trying to leverage a little automation inside the CRM to build automations, and mostly using tags. And it was so complicated with hundreds of tags, and it was very hard to work with. So that's the first option, and so it works good for small businesses or businesses that don't change much. The second option is to actually have someone and find a developer or an agency that build apps and build something custom for you. and that can get really expensive.
Very expensive, yeah.
Very expensive, and long, because you have to explain your business model, and they have to understand your business model and start to build things. So the average rate is probably like $250 an hour. So it's starting to get expensive quickly. And then there's a new avenue, newish, which is like the no-code space, and that's where both you and I are, and that's when you can kind of like do things yourself, and that's kind of like a tool like Knack. Someone could that's curious and that likes to build stuff could probably get an app going in a few days, at first, and then like an expert like you and I can probably build like a basic CRM in like less than a day.
Mm-hmm. So
it's awesome. It's just like it's a great new area, and it's only growing right now, and tool, like every tool is getting better right now. There's a lot of competition, so I think like no code has a great future.
Yeah. The other thing I've seen businesses do when the software they pick doesn't really fit very well is they start to change how they do business to fit the software, and that's a terrible outcome too.
Yeah, so that's another one. Yeah, that can be dangerous. So yeah, definitely. I mean, no code, like that's what tools like Knack are awesome. Is like there are some technical limitations because obviously I try to keep things simple so that they can't just keep on adding features. But like overall, it is like very easy to customize and to grow with your business. So like for example, if I go back to a tutoring app, like the initial product app had probably 15 objects. Now the app has like 85 objects. So now it's also managing like time tracking for office employees. It's managing the blog content. So right. Like someone can use a rich text editor in the app and then press send, and it creates like a blog post.
So what's common with companies that start using these tools, they'll start using Knack to solve problem A, and then they'll say like, wow, well, I've got this other problem and this other problem and this, like, it just, once you start using these tools, it grows, because once the business owner sees what they're capable of, you just kind of, they can kind of take over and run their whole business.
Yeah. And so it's a beauty of it. And it's also a danger, because then suddenly we start to build really fast apps that can get pretty complex. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why sometimes it's good to team up with a partner to help keep things in track, because apps can get enormous. And if they're not poorly built, but if it's not really well thought, the database could be pretty heavy, like in terms of connections, for example, of formulas, and certainly like the app could slow down.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like one of the drawbacks of all apps is speed can be an issue if it's too bloated. But yeah, I mean, it's awesome. It happens all the time. Like clients starting with something really small, they're like, oh, I just want to see the invoices status, and then suddenly they want they also want to be able to send reminders to their clients to pay the invoice, and then all kind of things, or pay the invoice online. So it grows. They tend to grow fast, and people can get addicted to this.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, can we just do this? And suddenly you have a new page on the app, and then the employees have to learn a new tool, like a new feature. Sometimes it's just like so many new features arrive that it's hard to keep everyone in the loop that you can do this now.
Right.
So
something else when you start using no-code tools, like, and if you don't hire a partner, you're like, hey, I'm brand new and I'm figuring out how to learn like a platform like Knack. What I've noticed, I noticed this myself, is the stuff I built with Knack 5 or 6 years ago probably could have been built a better way. Mm-hmm. Now that I have 5 or 6 years of additional Knack experience. And so that's kind of the benefit of working with the partner too, is that there are ways to build things with all these systems that work, but then there's maybe a better way to build them that's, more sustainable and scales better.
Yeah, I mean, typically, the example is like you start, like you say, okay, I'm going to create a new object in Knack, and you create, like let's say for client, it's just like a regular object. And then 2 years down the road, you're like, well, now I'm running this digital agency, and now I want my clients to have a portal where they can upload documents.
Right.
But because it's an object and it's not a user role, well, you have to kind of redo everything. And that's always difficult. So now, for example, for me, when I build a Knack app, like everything that's tied to a person, even though like they might never have access to the app, I always create a role. Mm-hmm. So like just in case, like down the road they need some kind of access, it's there.
It's there. Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's so many things like this. I mean, for me, I still work on the tutoring app. That's my first big app that I built. I still work on it, and I'm like, sometimes I have to look back at things I've built like 5 years ago, and it's just still it's painful because it's very hard to undo.
Right.
And I know it could be so much more efficient. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely is good to get some help at first, and or even have someone that's familiar with your app and you can contact when you get stuck somewhere. So like to save some time.
Right.
It's always a good approach. Like probably build a foundation with someone, and then you can build the iteration yourself. But like when you need some help, you have someone on like retainer to jump in and that knows your app and doesn't need like 2 hours just to see what is what and right. help you. That's a pretty cost efficient way to build things.
Yeah. So let's shift gears here a little bit and let's talk about Integromat and Zapier. So Integromat and Zapier are I think Zapier is probably the more well-known platform. Integromat is a direct competitor of Integromat or of Zapier. And let's talk about those. And both of those are integration platforms as a service. So that's a software as a service that you can sign up for to integrate different tools together and automate your data. And so, like I said, Loic and I are both Integromat registered partners. So we're partners with them, but we have both also used Zapier for a very long time. And so we're just going to talk about, Integromat versus Zapier. There's a whole bunch of videos out on YouTube where you can do this, but we're just going to create our own and talk and make our own video about this. So let's talk about pros and cons. Let's start with Zapier. So pros of Zapier. Why would somebody want to use Zapier? And then we'll talk about the drawbacks of Zapier.
Okay, so Zapier is like the oldest platform out there that does this, as far as I know, and probably like the most people are the most likely to find on their way when they try to automate something. That Zapier would be probably the first option they'll find. So Zapier is really good because they've been in business for a long time, and they have like a lot of apps. I would say, on top of my head, I think there were 2,000. So like most
I Googled it. I found over 3,000 now.
Okay. So and they're growing fast. So they add a lot of apps. For example, they have a lot of obscure like specialty CRMs that you can find on there. And that's great because it helps people, that don't want to connect directly with an API to get the ball rolling. So Zapier is like really, really good to build simple automation, like with a few steps. Like think about new submission form on your website. Look if the contact already exists in your CRM. If it does not exist, create a contact. Typically, like 3-4 step automation, and someone with no experience would probably be able to build this, like fairly easily, because the way they build the UI is kind of like a funnel. Is almost impossible to escape. It's like vertical. You start from the top, and then you click, and every time you click, you move to the next step. So it flows very easily. And it kind of like, it almost instructs you every step to say, okay, now build a connection. Now, like map your fields, and okay, now you can test it. So that's perfect. So that's really like the big advantage of Zapier. It's like a pretty easy to understand tool. And it's kind of like a good place to start when you build your first automations. That's kind of like a good way to get familiar with Zapier.
Right. And what some of the drawbacks, kind of the one I made a note of is just, if you have to do math or if you have to format a date, like that becomes like its own step. Like you can't do that within a step. So like everything you do becomes a step in Zapier. To me, that's kind of one of the drawbacks of Zapier.
Yeah, so that's definitely a big one. It's just like, and I don't know at this point if it's like a way to just increase revenue but basically, yeah, it's every time you need to do some formatting, when you start, and that's mostly impacting people that they want to build like a bit more advanced automation. You can start to have like 10 formatter step, in your automation, and so it's just like 10 more operations, and it just like increase your cost like crazy.
Right.
When in Integromat it will be done in like 0 step. It will be just built into the module. And one example I have is like I used to get for a client like strings, like email as a string, not email, sorry, addresses as a string. And I had to, and obviously like in any kind of database, you don't. In most cases, an address as a field for street and an address, a field for city, state, zip code. So like the way to do this in Zapier was to kind of like split the string for every comma, and that was one step for the. So that they changed this now. It's a bit better, but back in the day, I had to split like those string and then split the substring, and it was like 4 or 5 steps to just do this.
Right.
And it was absurd, and it was like so hard to. So tedious to do that you just want to pull your hair off.
Right.
And one other thing too is just like you can't clone the steps, so like sometimes some steps are very similar. You only need to change a few things, and there you just have to kind of like go and select the new mode, like select the app that you want to use, and then select the function you want to perform, and all of this. So like when you build like a lot of automation, that starts really to be a drag. So the in terms of user experience too is like formatting data and like kind of copy pasting, duplicating a branch. These are like the big drawback of Zapier. Another big one I want to touch base is like the way they built the UI was vertical. So which is great when you get started and you have no experience. But the issue is down the road, automations are like get more complex, and then so like the way to kind of like branch out something is to use what they call path. And then path are just like, okay, so let's say the example that I gave earlier is like you look if you have a new lead in your website, you look if the lead exists in your CRM, and then now you want to, if the lead exists, you want to update the lead. If the lead does not exist, you want to create it. So here you have to create 2 paths. And those paths are just, the way it's built, you just when you pass B, for example, you can't see past A. So like on this very simple example, is a problem. But like sometimes it's just like really hard to manage because you have to open the path, close the path, and go back to. So it's just like a lot of clicks. Is very very difficult. When Integromat is like a big canvas, and you see all the branches, all the logic in front of you. And it's so much easier as soon as you start to build complex flow.
Right.
So the big drawback of Zapier is like super easy to get started, but then once you're addicted and you start to build automation, you're going to hit a wall pretty quick.
Right. And I will say one of the advantages we're going to switch in talking about Integromat here in a second, but one of the things, and I think a lot of, even high-end Integromat users keep a Zapier account because of those 3,000 connections. And I did it yesterday. I had something that Integromat wasn't really doing well. So I just kicked the data out to my Zapier account and did it there because it was just easier to kick that out. So I kind of use Zapier kind of like another module in Integromat really is why I have that. And I maintain, the lowest tier account for my client work. I don't use it a lot, but it's there and it's really helpful.
No, of course. And it's like, I think everyone that works a lot in Integromat faces those things like once in a while. Like the other day for a client, I couldn't find the right trigger in Integromat for Gmail, for example. Mm-hmm. Like I wanted to be able to trigger a scenario when a label is added to an email, and in Integromat is not doable. You can kind of monitor email with a certain label when they come in. But the issue is like if by the time Integromat does a lookup to look at the email, if the label is not there, then it's not going to see it. And if you add a label later, it's not going to trigger your automation. So and Zapier has this exact trigger. So like I told the clients like, hey, let's just get like a free Zapier or like a cheap, like a Zapier account, so you can just get this data. When the label is applied, you send the data to Integromat, and then we do the work there.
Right.
And it was absurd because it would have been easy to build in Zapier, but like by doing it with 2 apps, he was saving like $30 a month, and for a small business, that's $360 for the year.
Yeah, that adds up.
It had, and it's just like, and it was not worth it to have a bigger Zapier account for just doing that. But yeah, so it's just like sometimes I just wish like, there's always like a need there's often a need for like a Zapier account for like these random jobs. For
right.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's switch to Integromat. I think it's safe to say you and I both prefer Integromat over Zapier, as a whole. Let's talk about some of the advantages of using Integromat.
So I mean, the main, like one of the big factor for me, I'm going to go with the non-technical side first, which is like pricing. And I've been working with that at the Zapier account since 2015, I think. Prices have been going up and up and up a lot because, they have a very strong market position and they've been able to do so, which is great for them. But now I reach a point where I have some very small clients that arrived with me, and I'm like, I had something super silly the other day. It was a client, they wanted to when they get a new email, when they send a new email in MailChimp, or there is some email event like an unsubscribe or like a bounce or whatever, they wanted to add this information to their CRM. So simple things, just one event, find the contact in the CRM, add a note. So it was like 3 steps, but they send like 3,000 email a month. So that's 10,000 operations, or something like this. So like the price was like, I think it was even more than that because it was a bit more complex. But anyway, like it was like 5 times as expensive to do it with Integromat at the end.
Yeah.
So I was like, I rather, I think, and the value was not really big for the client. It was nice to have. And the thing is just like with Zapier, you would have just not done it because it wasn't worth it.
Right.
So pricing, I think Zapier is like at the point where, it's still fine for like very important automation, and that's probably you can still kind of like get a return on your investment. But like some kind of nice to have automation, I think they're almost too expensive now. So so that's kind of one issue. So Integromat is like way more competitive in terms of pricing. So that's a big factor. If we go to technical side, Integromat has just like a way better UX. You have is like all those round modules connected with each other. Like the filters are like between the connection to those modules. This is very easy to understand.
Right.
It's just like you can, and the visual is like anyone can understand how the data flows. They might not understand the logic, but they can understand where the data flows. And so for me, like when you start to build some integration on Integromat after like a few, you start to kind of like, you look at an automation and you can almost tell what it does before to open anything.
Right.
You can see the logic is like, oh, if this happened, then you have like, now you have like 3 options, A, B, and C, like this is so visual. This is it was a genius in terms of UX. So that's great. As we said, also like one thing that's amazing is like be able to dynamically map data. So put formulas within a field and say, like, okay, format the date, like for example, a date formatter is amazing. You can write a date like January 12, 2021, or you can put it, like in the day first or like the month first, like you can put the time. It's just like, it's amazing. It has cost 0 operation and it's like extremely easy to set up. You can even like put, instead of January, you can put Jan, it's just like, so So this is like extremely cool because you can put very complex formulas and save a lot of time and operations just doing so.
Right. Yesterday, here's an example. Yesterday, I was saving videos from Vimeo, and I was saving the data into a database, a Knack database. And the client's field was, how many minutes long was the video? The Vimeo gives you seconds. Well, with Zapier, I would have had to create a step and said seconds divided by 60. But instead, I just put it directly into that field. When I was mapping it to Knack, I said seconds divided by 60, and it did the math on the fly and added the right number to the database. So yeah, those formulas and math and they're very powerful.
Yeah, it's so yeah, date, math, even text formulas are really good. So another thing we didn't touch base about is like the ability to manage like multiple records. So for example, in Zapier, when you do a search for a record, let's say I'm going back to my very simple example with new lead in your website, search for a lead on your CRM. Well, if there's more than one lead with the same email, which shouldn't happen. Normally, any CRM will have the email is unique, but let's say it can happen. Zapier would just return the first record it finds because they're not really designed to handle multiple records, right? So, so that's kind of an issue. In Integromat, actually, let's put another better example is you get a new form submission and you have an email and you want to see, and it's an existing customer form, and you want to be able to pull how many deals you have with this client. Okay, so you're going to look at deals in your CRM based on that client's email. Well, Zapier will return one deal. Integromat will return all the deals. Okay, so what you could think is like, okay, Integromat could return all the deals and say sum them. You could use a module like a aggregator module and maybe sum the total of all the deals you have made with this client, and maybe email them back and say, oh yeah, you have done $10,000 in business with us last year. It's a useless automation. It's just an example.
Yeah.
It's just like it's so much easier to work with like multiple records. So I know Zapier, I've been working on it too. Now it's better. You can work with some apps that you work with multiple records like Google Sheets or Quickbooks, but it's just like way more difficult to do, and it's still pretty limited.
So really, kind of the positives of Integromat are pricing and power is kind of how I summarize them, and the ability to do that. So let's talk about cost a little bit. Is there kind of a way to compare, costs between the two if you're using Zapier versus Integromat?
Yeah, so it's always like kind of difficult because cost. Like when you think about automation, I think you should look at two things. You should look at the cost of building. Actually, it's three things: cost of building, the cost of maintaining, and the cost of running. So the cost of building, I would say, like my gut feeling would be it's probably like, if you're an experienced builder in Zapier versus an experienced builder in Integromat, it's probably like twice faster to build it in Integromat, if not more.
Yeah. And
that's just for the ability to copy and paste, like a lot less clicks. Everything is available within the module, so that's much easier. So that's for the cost of building, so much cheaper in Integromat. Unless the app doesn't exist in Integromat and you have to kind of do some more advanced stuff to get where you want to go. The cost of maintaining, this is a bit harder because in Zapier it's kind of like it's kind of a maintenance. It's kind of like a error handling. It's kind of like turnkey. You just select if you want to auto replay your errors, yes or no, and then that's kind of the way it works, and you don't have to worry about it too much, except when you do have an error that doesn't auto-resolve, well, then it starts to be really complicated to handle. Let's say, stupid example is like QuickBooks. You're trying to create a new invoice for a client, but you already have someone with the same name in QuickBooks. And that was written, like QuickBooks can only have like one display name. So
which is a common error.
Which is a very common error for anyone that does like a lot of volume.
Yeah.
And I used to get this error for a client, like on Zapier, like maybe 12 a week. And what I had to do was to tell them the error happened, and they had to manually execute the flow, which was, when you do an automation and like 1% of your task you have to do it manually is not fun. With Integromat, you could have something where you sort of say, if you have this error, what you're going to do, you're just going to add an asterisk at the end of the name, or you're going to add space or like a dash or whatever. So you make the name unique and you just keep going. Like, so for the same clients where they were spending an hour a week, doing this, they were like now, they save 50 hours, of admin time.
Right.
And that's $1,000. So, so that's the cost of maintenance. So like Integromat can be a bit more tedious to set all the error handling because it's so granular. You can do so much and exactly what you want. But in terms of maintenance, you have a lot less if it's well set up. And then the last cost is the cost of running. And this is the cost of running your scenario is obviously like the cost per operation change a lot based on your plan, obviously, and how many operations you do. But like, it's much cheaper on the Integromat, and it's like probably, I would say at least 5 times cheaper, sometimes 10. And some plans are even calculated. I have a cool blog post about the difference between Integromat and Zapier on my website. And on some plans, it could be like 50 times cheaper. So that's one thing. Second thing is a lot of time you can build, because a filter is not a step in Integromat. Like you don't need formatter. So like you can use your automation can use a lot less modules. And so like, you might use like 30% less modules on a complex automation. So that's 30% less operations, to work with.
Right.
So like if you count filters and stuff, you're just like, it's already like a pretty big change. So not only you're going to use less steps, but they're going to cost a lot less.
Right.
So I actually have like a little form on my website that's kind of fun to play with. You can see how much you pay right now in Zapier, and it will give you an idea of how much you will pay on Integromat.
Okay.
So I'll send you a link later if you want to add it for you.
And that's at wiseflow.co, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's and that's pretty is making some basic assumptions, and the pricing is from last year. So like, but it should be like still give a pretty good idea of like how much money can be saved. And actually, I have a lot of clients. What I do is like I show them how much I can save, and they're happy to pay my fee to like move them over.
Right. So tell me about that service. I know that that's something you offer is somebody says, okay, I'm paying more on Zapier than I would be on Integromat. How do we move?
Yeah. So I've been doing this like 18 months ago for the tutoring business. That's a really big client, and I moved like probably over like 250 apps. So,
oh, wow.
So I developed like some kind of expertise in doing so, so like the first approach is like kind of like looking at the app stack, right? Which apps they're using, and see if there's any kind of key app that might be missing in Integromat, so that would be like because this could be incurring a bit more cost, if you need to make custom API calls because the app is not supported by Integromat. But Integromat has a lot of apps too, so it's pretty rare. And then so that's the key thing. After, it's just like kind of get an idea of how much money is they're going to save. That's so like that's kind of the second step. And then after is like lay out a plan to do it, right? So like because automation, ideally you want zero interruption. So like you need to find the right way to keep things going into Zapier until you turn on Integromat. And then so, like you could work with a minimal disruption.
Right.
And so there's a bit of expertise there, and once you have the right way, the right approach, it works very well. So that's it's not that complicated. And the good thing too is like a lot of time, like some of the intelligence, like the design and stuff, can be reused, from Zapier to Integromat. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so because you and I, when we're familiar with Zapier, we understand quickly what's happening on Zapier, and we can quickly reproduce in Integromat without too much struggle. And then even better, we can see what happened on Zapier, why it's built this way, and just improve it in Integromat instead of just kind of making a copy, just like as close as possible from Zapier thing. We might start to. I always add some like a little special sauce, so it's like easier to. Either cheaper to run or just deliver more value for the clients. Let's say, I'm just going to add some HTML formatting to this node because it's going to look nicer on there.
Right.
And it doesn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
So things like this. Yeah. It's just like, I actually did like I had a client for e-commerce I moved over like a few months ago, and it's just like, he was pretty happy. So it was like, he saved like $2,000 a year on the Zapier. It spent like $500 to move like 4 or 5 key integrations, and then he was also improving integration that was more reliable, because he had a lot of stuff, like he had errors that was happening on Zapier, and he had no good way of preventing them. So he had like a disruption in his like supply chain, and his clients were mad. So he went from like having 3 or 4 mad clients a month to none. So he was pretty happy about that.
Yeah.
So
it saves a lot of time. And so if somebody wants to convert from Zapier to Integromat, they can go to wiseflow.co, contact you.
Yep.
I will say that if somebody's listening and they need like an hour of support for Zapier or Integromat, they can actually go to weblytica.com and they can book a time with either you or I on that site for, they may have a problem that they need to fix. So that's available too. And the way that works is you'll get whoever's available. If you want Loic specifically, then just reach out and we can get you a link that'll for sure go to his calendar. But so that's available too. So
yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this. This has been fun. We've covered a lot of ground, talked about a lot of different stuff, and
I hope it brought some value to the viewer. Sounds like it was definitely a lot going on, and we're pretty passionate about this. We both worked a lot on Zapier and Integromat, so we have a lot of strong feelings. But I would say I think probably the most important is the use Zapier or Integromat is like, if you use them right, you're going to get a lot of value out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So like don't, if Integromat is too hard for you to get started, don't hesitate to get the ball rolling on Zapier. And doesn't mean you're married to Zapier anyway. You can always change later.
Right.
I think it's more important to start building some key automations, and then worry about later about improving the performance and about improving the performance or saving costs. I think having a good automation is better than no automation.
Yeah.
So
that's true. And Zapier can still save you a lot of time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's a great learning tool too, because it's a bit easier to. It's like the learning curve is not as steep as Integromat. So like for first time users, it's definitely the good tool to learn for sure.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Bye.